as was suggested by the host, or that maybe we do like an introduction to Rav Kook. So it's hard to introduce, it's hard to summarize, but we'll start with something. We're living in, as we know, amazing times. After 2,000 years of exile, of the nation being scattered and fractured, Am Mefuzar B'Ami, like the Haman says, a nation that was scattered all over the world, like the dry bones of Yechezkel 37, bones scattered, fractured all over. And then, by the grace of God, He decides, the time of redemption, to return the nation to its full grandeur, to make a living nation again, the Jewish people back in their land, to its full stature, to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. As we saw, it's not complete all at once. It comes in stages. Also in Yechezkel 37, the physical stage, the physical rebirth, the bones come together, a body again, and then the neshama, then the spiritual aspect. So the nation is returning to life, but as we return in the exile already and coming back, there's two, let's say, distinct aspects, two parts of the nation. There were those that kept the spiritual side, the Torah, the mitzvot, in spite of all the negative influence outside throughout the exile, and those that came back to Israel that wanted to, again, to continue to be the holiness, to live as a holy nation in the land of Israel, the Torah, the mitzvot, and they cling to that, the Torah and the mitzvot. And they shied away from those things that were outside of the Torah realm. Things that they saw, we saw in Orot, that in the exile, tzimtzum is demanded, the minimizing, staying close to the center, to the core, the Torah, the mitzvot. Outside influences can be very detrimental. We start looking into universities and philosophy and wisdoms and dealing with the outside world, so to speak, the fullness of life, that can be very threatening. So in Israel, what was called the camp, the Yeshuv Yashan, the old camp. There were people that came to die and to study Torah and to die in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, in Tzfat, in Tveria. The religious community that you could say is isolated from the outside world, focused on the Torah. On the other hand, we had the members of the nation, of the Jewish people, that were now inspired with this new desire for life, a desire to be the full vitality, the leaving of the ghetto, right? They went to university they met the world of science and wisdom, philosophy, art, music, became exposed to and wanted that fullness of life. And those that were tended towards the national connection to the land of Israel used those forces to want to be a nation like other nations, to emulate them, to be a nation with government and music and philosophy and science and all that they thought was outside of Torah. They thought that life, if you want life, vitality, nationhood, you have to seek that outside. As you know, the Enlightenment and etc., that those that sought the outside wisdom, so to speak, the vitality, thinking that was outside of Torah. And unfortunately, in the exile, indeed, there's the difficulty of unifying the physical and the spiritual, being a holy nation that doesn't exist outside the land. So we had this separation, this split, this polarization even, of these two camps that ultimately came to Israel, the Yeshuv Yashan, Yeshuv Chadash, the old camp, the religious with their clothes of Polish, whatever, the clothes that you know of today, still continue a certain dress of what others, the new camp, they saw that as the galut, the exile that they finally got rid of. We're coming back to Israel to make the new Jew, the new Israeli, full of vitality, full of life and being and nationhood. And again, the two saw each other as mutually exclusive, one against the other. One cannot continue with the other. It's either religion or state. It's either the Yeshuv Yashan, Yeshuv Chadash. And unfortunately, there's a great polarization, animosity, hatred, and a very a difficult situation we had over 100 years ago, so 120 years ago. And then, again, by the grace of God, that Hashem sends down neshamot. He sends down souls, right? Adon kol neshamot, the master of the souls. God organizes history such, the hashgacha, the guidance of God, that sends down special souls, leaders that are needed to meet the needs of the nation, to lead the nation in different times. When the Jews went into exile, the famous story, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, but summarizing it, when he said to give me Yavna and its wise scholars, he didn't ask for Yerushalayim. He realized the nation's going into exile. Now you could say, translated the Torah of the collective, the nation, the full vitality, the kingdom of priests and holy nation into the individual. How to live the individual life according to Torah mitzvot. How to salvage Judaism on the individual level. He translated, like I said, from the klal to the prat. We don't have sacrifices, we don't have the Shekhinah, prophecy. Now we have prayers, more focus on the individual prayer, the Gemilut Chasadim, charity, goodness, the individual level of Torah. And then the time of redemption, we are returning back to, like I said, the national level, we're growing back to the full size, the life size, the totality of Jewish nationhood, of a Goy Kadosh, a nation, a Goy, a nation, Kadosh, a holy nation. The goal is to be all the trappings of nationhood, all of the existence of human enterprises and endeavors of life, of agriculture, economy, science, and all of that is holy. All of that reveals God's name in the world. All of that is a conduit that expresses the neshama, like our individual bodies express our neshama, are supposed to, right? To be used properly, to be conduits, to express God's name in all of life. Not to be recluse, not to run away from life, not to live in a monastery, whatever. But fullness of life and the neshama is what dominates and pushes and drives all of life. Everything becomes holy. Like we said in the Path of the Just, chapter 26, on the holy person. So too on the national level, we're coming back now to nationhood, totality of life. And all of that is to express a neshama, a unique soul, a divine, a holy nation. Rav Kook is this God-sent, this soul that comes down to guide the nation. In this time of returning to nationhood, he sends down a soul that guides that is aware of the total ideal, let's say, comes to show the nation who we are as a nation. What are we coming back to? What are we returning to? What are we coming back for? What is the significance of our existence as a nation, our presence and possession of the land of Israel? For what? What is it for? In other words, we know the Judaism, the life, individual, to do the 4 cubits of halakha, right? The Gemara says in Brachot 8a that since the temple was destroyed, the Jews in exile, all we have is the 4 cubits of halakha. The 4 cubits is the minimum domain of the individual. Individual life, the holy kitchen, the holy Beit Midrash, the learning study halls. But a nation, we don't have that full totality of God's name revealed in the nation, which we said that's why Yechezkel 36, right, calls it a desecration of God's name. God's name cannot be sanctified on the total level, the big level of a neshama, a divine ideal revealed in all of life. But now we're coming back to that. But what is the significance? Just to have nationhood, just to have sovereignty? How to put the two together, how to see, understand, and guide the nation to recognize the significance of its return to life again. Like the adolescent grows up and now he's finding himself with all these forces and energies and talents. And now he's search for identity. What is it all for? What am I doing with it all? What am I living for? What's the purpose of life, the meaning? So God sends down at the time of these big questions, like Mor Nevuchim. There was a generation of, the perplexed. So God sent down the Rambam, the guide for the perplexed. The time of the redemption, God sends down this soul, as we'll see a little bit, Rav Kook, that is this unique, very unique and soul that comes, enables the guidance of the nation to understand, know thyself. Who are we? What are we? What is the meaning? Because the difficulty is that seeing the secular return, seeing that new camp, we said, the Yeshuva Chadash, that sees the goal in and of itself as just nationhood, being a nation like everyone else, like all the other nations. And not only that, but unfortunately, because of the misconceptions, thinking that to be a nation again, we have to negate all that we had in the Galut, all that religious garb and the physical garb, and also the spiritual, all that, those mitzvot, that's archaic. Now we're the modern man, the enlightened man. Now we want to be a nation among the nations to be like everyone else. So at this time of difficult stages of rebirth, there's many challenges that we have and how to relate to it. The secularization, the materialism, atheism, throwing all that was holy, throwing it all away, that was cherished for generations. How to relate to this? The simple gut reaction is to reject, to yell, to scream, to ostracize that these are lousy, rotten people. But Rav Kook, again, this other dimension, this special vision that sees beyond the moment, that sees beyond the external facade. Like the vision of Rabbi Akiva at the end of the Gemara in Makot, page 24, when Rabbi Akiva, right, when he sees the destruction of the temple, and he's laughing, and the other rabbis, Tanaim, giants of Torah, are crying. So what, you don't see, Rabbi Akiva, don't you see? You're not aware of what's going on. You don't see the destruction. How can you laugh? So Rabbi Akiva saw what they saw. He saw the destruction and mourned over that. He rent his clothes, but he understood how this is the preparation, how this is what's growing here. This is a preparation for the third and final temple, for an even greater level of God's expression of his name in the world. In other words, to see not just a moment, what is growing, or as Chazal say in the Gemara, Masechet Tamid, Tractate Tamid, page 32, Ezu Chacham Haroet Nolad. He who is the wise, he that sees the Nolad, sees that which is being born. In other words, he doesn't see the moment. He sees the embryo, he sees this X-ray vision that sees the whole adult rabbi scholar, even in the embryonic state. In other words, he sees what's growing and what's developing, what's coming to expression. That is his view of Rav Kook. When others that see the moment, see the external facade, the behavior, the anti-religious, etc., and all the negativity. And they can say, how can Rav Kook, how can you laugh? How can you praise? How can you support? How can you talk to these people? There are rabbis that say we have to disown them, to pray for their downfall even. There's a famous letter to Rav Kook of a great rabbi that says we pray for the downfall of the wicked. Doesn't that include these Jews? How can you support them? And how do you try to educate and teach them? And we just have to get rid of them. So those, again, because if you see the moment, that's the only solution, it seems. It's them, it's us, how do you say? It's us and them. They're the bad guys, we're the good guys. We have the Torah, they don't have Torah. What's there? Never the twain shall meet. But Rav Kook's vision of the inner dimension, what Hashem is doing, not the behavioral level, the inner divine dimension, the absolute side that God, what he's pushing, the neshama, that is the redemption, the divine ideal, the name of God, that is pushing the redemption, is bringing and refusing, how do you say, infusing the nation with life again, even when the participants themselves are not aware of that source. They think we're coming back to make a secular nation like Bulgaria or other nations that became independent. We want to be like them. And Rav Kook is talking about the holiness of this return to the nation, that God's hand behind this process. These people are not mentioning God's name. They are against God. They say all day, we don't believe in God. The question is if it's in their hands to take God out of the picture. The baby can say, I don't have a neshama. I don't believe in souls. I don't believe in God. The baby, a Jewish baby, has a Jewish soul. That neshama is intrinsic, inherent. The ideal, though, is to be aware of it, to understand it, live accordingly. But there's a level of the inner essence of itself, the inner source of this process of redemption. The Jews coming back to the land of Israel is for the absolute name of God, the Exile 36, the Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name in the world. What sanctification of God's name? A secular state, anti-religious. You're like Rabbi Akiva, how can you laugh? Don't you see what's going on? You're some mystic. You love Israel so much that it blinds you from seeing all the negativity, what's going on here. So Rav Kook was not blind, the opposite. Those that see just the surface are unfortunately the blind that don't see, again, anything beyond what they can measure and see what meets the eye, what's in the newspaper level. So the baby says, I don't have a neshama, so he doesn't have a neshama. But again, it's not in the baby's hand if he agrees or not, doesn't agree to have a neshama, to have this soul, to have this God's hand pushing and giving him life. So Rav Kook, aware of this, and one of the basic teachings of Rav Kook over and over, as even in his words, and we mentioned once how, I forget the grammar in English, but the holecho mitaveh, that is going, I don't know, the present, continuous present, going and developing, going and growing. The verbs he uses is always holech ve'or, holech ve, going and growing and developing, and this process, seeing the process of history. History is not a moment. You can't look at a slice and judge properly. You totally misjudge, especially as we mentioned in the redemption process, how the rabbis told us ahead of time in Tikkun Zohar, that Rav Kook brings in his letters, that the rabbis told us that one of the keys to understanding the redemption, the generation of the redemption, it says there's generations that are good on the inside and good on the outside. In other words, they have an inner good soul, let's call it, good positive energy inside, and their behavior is according to that, also good behavior, Torah, mitzvot. Anyway, there are those that are bad on the outside, bad on the inside. But the generation of the Mashiach is this ironic, paradoxical generation that is good on the inside, super inner good core of holiness, of divine illumination, of light, and yet evil exterior. The behavior is totally not good. So we have this, again, this enigma, this good on the inside and bad on the outside. So all you look at is the outside, you will see bad. You will see indeed, there's a whole list that people write about how the nation is, the negative, what's going on, desecration of Shabbat, etc., etc. And all that's true. Rabbi Kiva saw that, Rav Kook saw that. So how can he laugh? How can he participate? How can he guide? Because he sees the inner dimension, that inner good. And that is what is really pushing and driving that baby, even though he's not aware. And his goal is to teach and more to expose that inner dimension that the baby himself, the nation himself, becomes aware of its true essence. But it's not some fiction. It's not some external attempt to try to coerce or to try to become something that you're not. Just to expose the nation what we really are. This is just like picking up the curtain and exposing, putting the mirror in front of the nation, saying, this is your true essence. Your true essence is this absolute divine goal for all of creation, all of existence. The Jews returning to the land of Israel is not just for our benefit. This is the good, the name of God, the light of God that will shine and illuminate and lift and unify all of existence and upper levels and levels ad infinitum of connection to that source of life. That's what's at stake here. Even if the people themselves that are participating have no idea what I'm talking about or what I just said, but that's the reality. And the more we understand that and teach that and aware of that, and know that that's true, that actually is what brings it out, facilitates the process to make the people aware and, again, live accordingly and expose that. But that is, again, this review of Rav Kook, of seeing the inner, this mabat pnimi, this inner dimension. One other, if I had to, let's say, summarize, actually, there's someone that wrote many years ago, an author, a writer, poet, Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon. I'll translate it to English. He says, everyone knows and understands, according to the history, this was again over 100 years ago he wrote this. Rav Kook was apparently still alive when he wrote this. That everyone knows, looking at this period that we're living in the land of Israel, that without the reality of the existence of Rav Kook in this land at this time, the nation would have, the Yishuv, the settlement, that was before the state, the settlement of Israel would have collapsed. Well, here we have these two camps that are coming back, each one fighting the other. This fledgling, again, pre-state existence of settlements and this, and you have the religious and the core and the old city in Yerushalayim and Tveria, and you have these pioneers building settlements and agriculture, everyone at the throats of the other. That would have been the destruction. Each one, again, attacking and minimizing and pulling down the other. That would have been the end of the state of Israel, the settlement of Israel, because of the radical of the new generation and the old together. Both of them were radically against and opposing other and fighting and trying to destroy the other without any means between them to unify, without the important influence and the lofty influence of this great rabbi, Ish Nedivot, this great, this special personality that influenced them and all of life around them. This is what Rav Kook did. And he got the, how do you say, he was attacked from both sides. The secular side says he looks like them, he dresses like them, he's a rabbi, he's a Torah, he's one of the galut things that we want to get rid of. He's religious. The religious camp, what you call the ultra-Orthodox, whatever you call it, the Haredi, was against Rav Kook. Here's this nationalist rabbi, he's pro-Zionist, he's outside the camp. The kids both were against him, and he's in this middle, but not just in the middle, so to speak, that tries to put the two together, but the true harmony, the oneness that includes both, that requires both. The camp of Israel, the Goy Kadosh, requires Goy and Kadosh. The nation of Israel is not just spiritual holy people. It's a nation, a living nation, and the nation is not just a national existence of government and politics and army and agriculture, but a holy nation. We need both parts. And that is this tfisa that, again, if I had to summarize Rav Kook in one word, or the content of his ideas, is achdut, oneness, unity, harmony, the holistic perspective of seeing the one. And this is what, as we learned before, that Eretz Yisrael enables this Eretz Yisrael unifies, right? Goy echad ba'aretz, the nation that is one in the land. This is where we become one. We can live that oneness. Not as a philosophy, as a living enterprise, right? Up till now, we're scattered bones. You can't live like that. The neshama, my example of the metaphor of the bones, the different limbs, in the hospital, right? The lung and kidney machine, that's the other division in the hospital, and the lung machine, the kidney machine. But the neshama cannot be revealed through those broken parts. When we're in the land of Israel, that's what enables the neshama, as we always bring down from Yeshayahu 42, right? 42, noten neshama la'amalea. I give the neshama to the nation upon the land. This is where the neshama can be revealed, not amafuzar, not a scattered body and bones, but a living nation, the neshama coming through this conduit of a nation in the land. Eretz Yisrael enables that goy echad ba'aretz, as the Zohar says, in the land of Israel they are one. And then they express God's oneness. But also we learned about the Torah Eretz Yisrael. The Torah Eretz Yisrael, that's this vision that sees the one, the white light before it's diffracted, the ability to see the view from the roots above, as we saw the Gemara on Bava Batra, etc. The air of Eretz Yisrael makes wise. This unified vision, this holistic vision of all the colors, all the lights that are later in the exile. They were all fractured, a piece here and a different aspect here, but all the parts, everything together. And that's what really paints the full picture. In other words, God's name, the oneness of God, right? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, we just read in the Parashat HaShavua. The oneness of God, the world is one. The world is all, this multiplicity and variety and diversity are all branches of one super ideal of goodness, of God's light. And so the ability to see that, we saw again the Midrash Tehillim 105, that if Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi tells his son, if you wish to see the Shekhinah, the one, the divine, in this world, B'olam hazeh, in the fractured world, how to see the one in the multiplicity. All you see is multiplicity. All you see is the surface. But there's a root level. There's the view from the roots above, as Rav Kook writes. Seeing the world as it comes from the roots, and then it from the divine source, and then how it's diversified in all the branches, but the branches of one essence, of one good light. And that's why if you wish to see, like the rabbi said, if you wish to see the Shekhinah in this world, learn Torah and Eretz Yisrael. So Eretz Yisrael, this vision of Torah Eretz Yisrael, this vision of unity, that is, again, if I would say in the summary, one word of Rav Kook, this achdut, this holistic view that sees it all together, the individual and the national and the universal, the physical and the spiritual, heaven and earth, the science, philosophy, wisdom, halakha, nigle v'nister, the aspects of Torah, poetry, music, philosophy, everything, and all the parts are needed, and how to see how the puzzle, how each part fits in its place. There's a proper place. Not everything should be dominant or whatever, but there's to see to guide this returning nation to this fullness of Goy Kadosh. You need some of that vision that sees the whole picture of the puzzle, and knows how to put each thing in its place. Don't overstep your bounds. You belong here. In the orchestra, right? The orchestra, you have the conductor that guides all the different instruments to work in perfect harmony. That is this Rav Kook that was sent, this unique soul, as we'll see a little bit, maybe a biography, a sketch of the dates and time, whatever, but this unique personality, this unique neshama, that besides the human gifts that he used, but first of all, the divinely endowed with special characteristics. As maybe I want to read a few testimonies of great giants of Torah, what they said about Rav Kook, that he wasn't just another great rabbi, another scholar, another knowledgeable, and it's another dimension, which is hard to understand, but especially for us, a rabbi that knows a lot and knows a little bit more or less, what does it mean, another dimension of Torah scholarship, and of not just Torah scholarship, of a neshama, this personality, this divinely, again, this God-sent neshama that to lead the nation at this time, when it's coming back to be the totality of Am Yisrael, it needs a leader that can show and understand, and that's what we try to learn from his teachings to fill the gap, so to speak, what is needed now, the leadership to understand all the different aspects, the necessity of all the different aspects. Doesn't negate the other. That if you're not like me or you have a different function that I don't want you. The orchestra, the conductor knows that all the instruments are needed. As we said, for the rich music, you need all the totality of all the instruments. And that is Rav Kook, this giant conductor. Like I, first of all, given these divinely endowed talents, let's call it, but also, as we'll see, used them to the best. In other words, worked hard in effort to study, to learn, and to grow, to be what he became. It's not just enough, let's call it inner potential. We have to utilize it. So first of all, like I said, we saw these 2 points. One of seeing beyond the moment, the surface, the external facade. This vision that sees the inside, which is connected to the achdut. The second thing I said is the achdut, this unified view that sees, again, not just the branches, that's the external, but the roots underneath the ground. Whereas the Maharal says it's like an upside down tree. The roots are above. Usually the tree is underneath. But it's like an upside down tree, the divine roots above, and how that branches off into all the branches of existence of life. And all of that is holy. Until, like it says in Zechariah chapter 14, that in the future, the embellishment, the dress of the horse will say Kodesh Lashem, holy unto God, which was right on the forehead, the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol in the holiest time, the holiest person. And that's what will be on the lowest, on the horses. The Kodesh Lashem will permeate all of existence, goodness. It's hard to understand what that means when the Shekhinah is revealed and God's life flowing. Life is meaningful in and of itself. It's the beauty of life. It's tough. But that is where we're headed. That's what's taking place. And that takes the vision that sees beyond the moment. Because again, the moment sees the branches. The external sees what is now in front of you at the moment. You see a baby and you see, looks like a tadpole before the embryo. Looks like a tadpole, but there's no difference. But you know that there's a difference. You know where it's growing. This is an embryo of a human being that will grow up and through the stages become what it will become. And that is this unified vision, which is connected to that inner vision. This isn't, though, let's say, a philosophic aspect of seeing the one. It was a neshama that lived that oneness. In other words, he was gifted with this totality of all the different aspects of an unbelievable memory, of holiness, of piety. Again, he worked on that. It wasn't you're born perfect, but he developed into this totality of all the aspects of Torah, to study all the different fields of Torah. We'll see later maybe the quote of Rav Elyoshiv, the grandfather of Elyoshiv that passed away recently, one of the great rabbis of generations. But his great-grandfather, his grandfather, was a famous giant of Kabbalah, the Leshem. He's called the Leshem on the book that he wrote, Leshem Shvo V'Achlama, book of Kabbalah. Rav Elyoshiv, Rav Kook learned with him, and he said about Rav Kook, the grandfather, right, Rav Elyoshiv, how there's different aspects of Kabbalah, there's different methods, shitot, the Ari, the Rav Moshe Cordovero, the Gra, different approaches, let's say. And Rav Kook, he said, knew them all, was immersed in them all. Anis Raz, and nothing was hidden from him. All the secrets were known in front of him. And that's just the aspect of the Kabbalah, but also in the Halakha. He wrote music, poetry, a poet, a philosopher, a national leader, political leader, so to speak. He wasn't in a movement, but he tried to help. Actually, we'll see, he tried to make this Degel Yerushalayim, a movement that would be like the neshama of Zionism, the secular Zionism. He tried to form, he started, but it fell apart, didn't last too long, didn't succeed totally, of the Degel Yerushalayim, of a movement of Zionism that recognized the divine goal of this Zionism. So again, he was dealing with the politics and Stavsky and all they did in the political arenas and working. In other words, all the aspects of life. That's what he, not just as a philosophy to talk about everything is included, but he lived like that. That was his neshama, and loving, as we'll see maybe a few of as much as we get to today, the introduction. If you want to continue, maybe again, if there's next week, we'll continue, I don't know. But the totality, the allness, the totality of everything That's how he lived, the love of all of Torah, the love of Am Yisrael, the love of Eretz Yisrael. So they said they were giants of love of Am Yisrael, right? There's Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, and there's others, and there are those that were giants of loving of Torah, and giants of loving Am Yisrael, of Eretz Yisrael. But to love them all, but to be this dimension that there's greatness of all, in other words, this totality, that was very unique. You know, this personality that is not just a giant in Kabbalah, the giant in Halakha, the giant in poetry, to be a giant of all. But again, it's not just like quantitatively. It's this qualitative neshama that is all-inclusive. This, again, a divinely created soul that God sends down when the nation is now returning to that totality. Like I said, returning from the prat to the cloud. We're going back to the encapsulated form, where like you used to have the fizzies, right? You put that little thing into the water and it becomes the juice, or old days of mine. These little concentrated orange juice, if you put it into the water, and it would come out a whole cup of. So here we had the Am Yisrael was encapsulated, was translated to the individual, and now we're coming back to the full size, the nationhood of the kingdom of priests that will broadcast God's name to all of mankind, to uplift all of existence, all. As we mentioned, Aleinu L'Shabeach at the end, the second paragraph, we say it 7 times: the all of nation, all the people, all the wicked, all the knees will bow, everything. And we mentioned also in Ashrei. We mentioned, you did the homework. Those who remember how many times it says all in Ashrei, Kol. For those who remember, anyone? Right, 17 times, which is the word of Tov. The Tet Vav Bet is the gematria of 17. That Tov is good, because when you see the whole, it's all good. The world is good. God created a world of goodness. He wishes only to bestow absolute good for all. When you see the parts, the pieces, fragmented, then there's room for evil and suffering. But when you see, like it says in the Torah at the beginning, Breshit, he saw it all, and then Tov Ma'od. You see that it was good, very good. When you see the whole picture, all of history, all of reality, the white light, then you see the beauty, like the orchestra maybe. Each one, like the cacophony, each one is tuning up, and the different instruments sound awful. But when the conductor comes and unifies them all, the harmony, the beauty of the music that comes out then, that is this oneness. That's where we're going. All the multiplicity to be revealed in the bigger one, the goodness. So the Tov Hashem Lakol, we say in Ashrei. Tov Hashem Lakol. God is good for all, good to all, and everything. The all is what is good, and that view of the all. Maybe I'll read to you a few things. There's many. Actually, there's so many books, biographical books about Rav Kook, or anecdotes and stories about Rav Neria has like a few, I think 5 or 6 volumes of stories about the life of Rav Kook in each, how do you say, tachana, each stop of his life, the stage of his life, when he was, the childhood, before the bar mitzvah, in Lutzi, when he learned the yeshiva, and he got married, and then the Volozhin, and then the rabbi in Europe and Lithuania, and then when he came to Rabbi Yafo, Yerushalayim. In other words, each state there's volumes and stories. So I'll just give you this quick biographical sketch for those, again, that don't know maybe who we're talking about, or when he was living, or what, a little bit of not the boring details, actually interesting. But we're talking about he was born on the 16th of Elul in 5625, which is, some people call it the common era, 1865. In Griva, sitting near Dvinsk. Then it was Latland, now like, I guess, Belarus. Then it was part of Russia. His father actually was you could call it a mitnaged. He was an emissary for Volozhin Yeshiva, Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, to collect money, to gather. He was like connected to the mitnagdim, let's say, the Lithuanian yeshivot world. And his mother was Dafka, the daughter of one of the first Hasidim of Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch, the author of the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of the Balatanya, right, the founder of the Chabad movement, Lubavitch. So his mother's side was Hasidi, his father's side was Litvak, the Mitnagem, and Rav Kook again came out this unified, holistic of all the different parts and all the different aspects. He studied in his hometown till Bar Mitzvah. Later he went to certain yeshivot. I won't give you all the details. You can see other places, Lutzin, under great rabbis. He was known as went to study in Smargon near Vilna. He was known as the prodigy, the Eloi of Griva, right? They used to call people by their cities, right? The Eloi, the prodigy of Griva. Then, a great rabbi, who was the rabbi of Ponevezh, the famous city Ponevezh. Now there's yeshiva. They moved, again, the yeshivot that were in Europe, that were decimated, now have tried to continue here in Israel, right? In Bnei Brak, the famous Ponevezh yeshiva, giant yeshiva. So in the city of Ponevezh, the original city, Rabbi Eliyahu David Rabinowitz Tomim, a giant of Torah, he chose this young budding scholar to be his son-in-law. Between the engagement and the marriage, he learned for over a year and a half in the famous Volozhin yeshiva. The Volozhin yeshiva, that's a story in itself. That was like what's called the mother of the yeshivot. Yeshiva used to be people used to learn with the town rabbi, with the parents or the father or the town rabbi, but to have a dormitory, to come to outside of the city and to eat and stay outside and to learn Torah full time, that was a novelty. That was started with the Volozhin yeshiva, founded by the student of the Vilna Gaon, Rav Chaim Volozhin. Later continued, when Rav Kook was there, the head of the yeshiva was the famous Netziv of Volozhin, Naftali Tziyuda Berlin. And we will hopefully mention him a little bit in continuation. So he learned there. He was known there as the prodigy of Ponevezh, based on from his father-in-law, his future father-in-law. So they called him the prodigy of Ponevezh. He learned there, they say, 18 hours a day of study. He just sat there totally immersed in all the aspects of Torah. Even actually, there's someone, the testimony here of before Volozhin. Again, there's books with all these different stories and anecdotes and testimony of these giants of Torah. But this, when he learned in Lutzin, when he was young still, he said this: the son of the father that he learned with there, he says, the elders of our town. This person told Rav Kook, Rav Kook's son, Rav Tziyuda, the Kohen Kook Zatzal. When Rav Kook passed away, this son of his Rav Kook's teacher told his Rav Kook's son that the elders of our town still remember with amazement your father, the Gaon, the holy and righteous and scholarly rabbi that learned here with unbelievable hatmadah, unbelievable total dedication, devotion. Hatmadah is total, how do you say, immersion, non-stop learning and study in holiness and purity. When he, again, I'll skip the different stages of his study. He learned with the great rabbi, Rav Reuben Halevi of Dvinsk, which was near Griva. I think it was the other side of the river. It was Dvinsk, the Or Sameach, the rabbi of the Rogachover, two giants, very unique giants in Dvinsk, the Or Sameach, Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. There's also stories here about his total respect and awe, not awe maybe, but respect totally for what he did for this young scholar that he met and talked to, Rav Kook. He used to go when he would visit him. The Or Sameach, total in respect of this young rabbi, Rav Kook. At the age of 20, when he got married, he started printing different articles, writing different things. He wanted to even launch his own monthly, Iturei Sofrim, which came out actually 2 volumes, until that also never really fully materialized. The dream of putting out more of a popular newspaper for Torah, a home for rabbinic literature, to unite all the factions of Israel. Again, to unite all, the unity, the different aspects, to see how they all are necessary, they all complement each other. Later, he became the rabbi of Zoimel in Lithuania. He was there, the rabbi, from 1888 to 1895. So 1888, so that means he was 23. He was like 22 and a half. Actually, there's a story about that also. So many stories, anecdotes. people to testify how he studied in the Volozhin yeshiva. There were three great. I mean, there was a lot of great rabbis. A lot of the giants of the previous two generations ago learned in Volozhin yeshiva. Rav Avram Shapira, the Dvar Abraham, Rav Isra Zalman Meltzer, the Evan Ezel, who later came to Israel. We'll mention him later. Hashem. Rav Epstein, the author of the Levush Mordechai. But the Netziv of Volozhin wrote, or said to someone who testifies, that Rav Kook was the important one of the yeshiva. Where does he say it here? The Netziv of Volozhin, right? The founder of the yeshiva, when he first came, this young student came to Volozhin. He says, for many years, we haven't seen anyone like this scholar, this young boy, this young Bachur. And then when he got to know him better, the Netziv says about him, in order to raise up, to teach, to educate a Bachur, like a person like this, it was worthy to found the Volozhin yeshiva. In other words, if it was just for him, it was worthy of founding the yeshiva just to put out a student like this. Again, this is the Netziv of Volozhin. If you know of his commentaries on the Torah, the Midrashim, the giant of Torah, the head of the famous Volozhin yeshiva. Right? And a Netziv, the kibbutz is named after, right? The Netziv. Says how Rav Mordechai Raviner, who studied at Volozhin then, he says, Erev Shabbat Chanukah, Tafresh Mem Hey, 1885. He says, came the Ilui from Griva, the Griva Ilui, the Griva prodigy, to Volozhin, and the yeshiva was amazed. This young boy, this young genius arrived. 19 years old he was then, and he already was Baki, he already knew Shas, Yordea, Tur, Choshen Mishpat, all these different. He already was so full of Torah at 19. He came like it was this prodigy that was not the usual. And again, Volozhin wasn't just a bunch of. It was the top yeshiva. That was again, I said, learning 18 hours a day there. There actually was an underground Zionist movement there. The Netziv of Volozhin was very Zionist. You should see his letter. We read his letters about Zionism and then supporting the Jewish return back to Israel. Not to say that it should come another way that we think should be better, more religious. And we have to support and be positive, see the hand of God that is bringing the Jews back to Israel. But nevertheless, the Volozhin yeshiva, but it was founded to learn Torah. In other words, in the yeshiva, you're here to study Torah. It's not for political demonstrations or whatever. But there were others that were those. I think it was called Netzach Yisrael. Anyway, there was this underground, so to speak, Zionist group in the yeshiva. And Rav Kook didn't participate with all of his Zionist and love of Israel, but now he's here to learn. And what he became, again, in those years of growing, until then he had studied, like we said, 16 hours a day or whatever, when he was before that. But this is the place, this is where he's studying. This is the, how do you say, the chamamah, the greenhouse, whatever, to grow and then later to give the fruits later. But now is the time of totally immersing in Torah and Yirat Shamayim, the midot, to becoming what he was the future to be. There's a story here of during Purim. The giant of Torah, Rabbi Chia Michal Epstein, the author of the Aruch HaShulchan. We know there's the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the more modern, let's say, the Chafetz Chaim that wrote the Mishnah Burat, like to summarize all the laws from the time of the Shulchan Aruch. There's new cases, new situations, and different things, and to summarize all the different opinions, to make it like the modern final word was accepted recently, I mean, by the nation more or less, over for the Ashkenazim, the Chafetz Chaim, right, the Mishnah Burat. But before that, there was a great rabbi, he wrote the Aruch HaShulchan, and also the Shulchan Aruch, with more sources and elaborating, and again, a very great rabbinic halachic authority. So he came once upon a time to Volozhin to visit his daughter and brother-in-law. The Netziv was his brother-in-law and his son-in-law. You figure out how that works. I'm not good at that. It was his brother-in-law and his son-in-law. Slicha, and his father-in-law. He was his father-in-law. It was his brother-in-law. I guess he married his sister, so you'll figure it out. They were related. So he came to visit the Netziv and his daughter, who was married to the... So the Netziv hurried up and showed him this. I have this prodigy, this young, promising student now in Volozhin learning by me. I want you to meet him. Very dear to me. And he was very impressed. He spoke, like, like the rabbis, they come and what do they talk about? Not the weather or whatever, the stock market. And they get into these conversations of Torah, halacha, of questions, and in different, Tosfot, different questions, things, Torah, give and take of Torah. And he was very surprised, this young person, and whether it's the Aruch HaShulchan, as he's known, Rav Epstein, is this giant of halakha. He sees the breadth of the knowledge of this young student in Ponevezh, the Ilui from Ponevezh, how quick he picks up things, and the Bikiyut, and it's all organized down to the halakha, all the sources. It's like, so he was known, Rav Michael, this rabbi, this Aruch HaShulchan, was known as one of the giants of the rabbis that people wanted to get smicha from. Right? Rabbinic ordination, you go to a rabbi in those days, you go to a rabbi, he questions you, he tests you, he talks to you in Torah, and sees if you're worthy of getting what's called Yora Yora, Yadin Yadin, the different levels of the rabbinic ordination of smicha. Today we have the chief rabbinate, you have to go through this battery of tests, then you get the ordination. There's also people today that certain rabbis give. The question is who the rabbis are. But the Aruch HaShulchan was considered like, if you get a smicha from him, you're set up for life. It's like, I don't know, Havdil. You get a degree from, MIT, whatever, Harvard, Havdil. But here you get a smicha from the Aruch HaShulchan, and people used to come, the rabbis would come, young students or young scholars that wanted to now enter the world of the Rabbanut. They would come to him and try to show their expertise and get the smicha from him. So many people came to him. He was visiting Volozhin, and now the opportunity, all these students came to him and tried to get out of him a smicha. He was a few weeks there, and they, the Ilui from Ponevezh, Rav Kook, he was learning Torah, immersed in Torah, wasn't looking for Rabbanut, wasn't looking for smicha, for, for Tu'udot, for degrees. He was learning Torah to do the word of God, to know and to connect to Hashem. He didn't pay attention to all the tumult around it to try to go to the Aruch HaShulchan to get smicha, which the opportunity was right there. He comes to Volozhin. Here he is right next to you now. But he was immersed in study. But this guest, the Aruch HaShulchan, thought otherwise. Not every other day does he meet a rabbi of this stature, this young scholar, that is so worthy to lismoch, to give him smicha. And he didn't do it immediately. He preferred to wait and do it more of a holiday, a special way of doing it. So when Purim came around, the Ilui from Ponevezh, Rav Kook, was surprised when he got a letter from the Vardok, the place of the Aruch HaShulchan, and inside of it was the smicha of the special smicha of the Aruch HaShulchan that didn't mince words. He elaborated. He didn't just say, you're a rabbi. He elaborated here, Tuarim, and titles, and very positive epithets in describing Rav Kook, the young scholar, and crowned upon him Yora Yora, Yadin Yadin. In other words, Yora Yora is the first level rabbinate, you could call it, of Yora Dea, that knows the laws of kashrut and Shabbat, etc. Yadin Yadin is very choshen mishpat, a rabbi that deals with the laws of torts and other more difficult, another level of the smicha. But he gave them both of them. Like one of the giants of the Torah, one of the giants of these Torah rabbis. Also, another story about Rav Matityahu Medanitsky, who was learning the Rav of Bhutan. And he learned also in Volozhin with Rav Kook. And he writes in an article, I guess, about Rav Kook, that 50 years ago, I learned in the Volozhin Yeshiva, and your great honor, your genius, Rav Kook, was called then the Eloi from Dvinsk. He had different names. The prodigy from Dvinsk, again, because he was from Dvinsk, next to Dvinsk. Of Griva, of Ponovitch, because of his father-in-law. But nevertheless, he called him, you were known then as the Eloi from Dvinsk. And our teacher, the Netziv, said that this is many years that the yeshiva never had someone like you, Harifut B'B'Kiyut, the depth and the breadth and the, how do you say, the Harifut is like the Harif, in Torah scholarship. There's some guy that is the Harif and Baki. Baki is someone that knows a lot. He knows a lot of the sources, he knows everything by heart. And Harif is someone who's more the penetrating, analytic mind. So Rav Kook was both, he says. No one was like you for years. The Netziv said, like I said before, he said that it was worth founding the yeshiva. It wasn't just to have a student like this. But here this rabbi is quoting that the Netziv said, we used to know that he said, how the yeshiva never had someone like you in Harifut and Bikiyut, like this young genius. I'll continue a little bit, going back to the biographical sketch here. He became the rabbi, we said, at Zoimel. Later, he became the rabbi of Boysk, when the Mordechai Eliashberg was one of the first, like the big Zionist ideologues of religious Zionism. He left his place, he vacated his rabbinate in Boysk, and Rav Kook accepted it in 1895. Again, all this time, Rav Kook is writing different things and essays about Eretz Yisrael and the nation of Israel and the nationalism of the holy, the foundation of Judaism. In 1902, Rav Naftali Hertz Halevi was the chief rabbi of Yafo, and the settlements then, the beginning, the fledgling before the state, 1902. He passed away, and Rav Kook was invited to fill the vacancy. But before that, a little story before that, again, there's books and books of these stories, if I would read them all, but I just want to share a few things with you. The Chafetz Chaim, as you know, hopefully you've heard of the Chafetz Chaim, the author of the Mishnah Berurah, as I said, and other books. He was a Kohen, right? The Shmirat HaLashon, you all know the books of his laws of guarding your tongue. Again, known as the giants of the previous generation. He tried to awaken Torah scholars to learn Kodshim. He said, we're coming back, the redemption is going to take place soon, we're going to have the temple again, we have to learn the laws of Kodshim, the laws of sacrifices and all these different aspects of Torah that were neglected, that weren't focused on because they weren't relevant. I mean, it's enough to learn the laws of Shabbat, of Kashrut, a few lifetimes, there's enough. The laws of Kodshim, all the three, right, the two orders of the six, out of the six of the Mishnah, the oral law, Kodshim and Tarot, the laws that don't apply yet today so much, laws of purity and the laws of the temple. But the Chafetz Chaim says we're coming back soon, and you try to arouse different scholars to learn, and amongst them was Rav Kook. He said you have to start learning, and we're delving into full-time more study of the laws of the temple and the sacrifices. But then, once upon a time, the Chafetz Chaim was in Ponovitch. And again, in those days at the beginning, when someone was married, you stayed by the father-in-law, you would eat by them, whatever, and learn Torah and grow, and he supported you for the beginning of the marriage. So Rav Kook was in Ponovitch, where his father-in-law, the Aderet, where's this picture here? I'll show you a picture, if I can find a picture. The camera. Can you see? Wait, I don't know if you can see. Wait, why isn't it showing up? Wait, can you see the picture? Wait, why can't I see it? I can't see it on my screen. I don't know why. No.
It's flickering on and off. It's flickering.
Yeah. Now you can see. Now?
Yeah.
This is the Aderet.
Yes. Okay.
He
Yeah.
was the rabbi in Ponevezh. Later, he became the rabbi of Mir, which also is a big yeshiva now in Israel, in Yerushalayim. As you know, the famous Mir Yeshiva, during the Holocaust, they escaped to Shanghai. Anyway, then they came to Israel. But he was, again, the chief rabbi of Ponevezh and the chief rabbi of the city in Mir. And later, the Aderet became the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. But his son-in-law, again, he chose Rav Kook to be his son-in-law. How did I get to that? I wanted to bring something else, but so we'll get to it. It's hard to keep these things in order. There's so many different books and stories. Got to the Chafetz Chaim that told him to learn Kodshim. So we got to Ponevezh, right? So the Chafetz Chaim came to Ponevezh, and Rav Kook came to visit him. When he was about to leave Ponevezh, Rav Kook came to visit him. The Chafetz Chaim says to him, "I have a request for your honor." Again, he spoke in third person, right? Bakashali lichvodo. I have a request that I want you. Promise me you'll say yes. Rav Kook said, without knowing what it is, he said, "I'm certainly, your honor, your excellency, so your kvodo, certainly you, the Chafetz Chaim, will not request from me something that I can't do, that is not good. So whatever, I will fulfill your request." The Chafetz Chaim says, "I want you to accept the first offer you get to be of the rabbanut, to be a rabbi of a city, of a town. I want you to accept. Next time, the first time, whenever you get an offer, you should accept it." Rav Kook didn't want to, again, the rabbanut, he felt that would detract from his ability to study and full-time devote to the service of Hashem, to be a giant of Torah, to write and different things. But the study of Torah was his life, was his totality of his existence. A rabbinate has to deal with a lot of problems and issues and people and fights, and so he got a way out of it. He said, I agreed to what you said, but the problem is you already wanted me to study Kodshim. You asked me before, remember? You told me to study Kodshim. So I can't do that. In other words, if I take upon myself the rabbanut, that will defer, or that will prevent me from devoting my full time to the Kodshim that you asked me before. So you see, I'm not going to do so. The Chafetz Chaim thought for a few seconds, and he says, "No, Rabbanutcha chashuva yoter, that your rabbinate is more important. That you should be a rabbi." He saw in him what the Chafetz Chaim saw in Rav Kook, that you have more to give. Your rabbinate will be a blessing to all of Am Yisrael. That's more important. How he became a rabbi in Exile. It's a neighbor near the city of Kovna. Like I said, in Exile, that was in 1888. Again, he's not even 22 years old yet. In those days, Exile had two rabbis. One was the rabbi of the scholars, and there was one the rabbi of the regular balabati, the people that worked, and they had two different things, and they were always in machloket. They were fighting. These two rabbis, you might not believe it, but unfortunately, these rabbis were fighting and quarreling between them until they finally, to settle this argument between them, they brought to the city three great rabbis to make a beit din, to make a court to decide what to do with these fighting rabbis. It gives the name of them. One of them was the Aderet, one of T. Hirsch Rabinovich, who is the son of the Rabbi Yitzchak Kovna, the rabbi of Kovna. His son was one of the three rabbis that came to what to do with these two rabbis of Zoimel that are fighting. The psak was that the two rabbis have to leave the city, and that's what they did. One went to Riga, and one went to America, and they both became rabbis and succeeded in their way. When they were separate, they were okay. Together, they were didn't work together so well. So now the city Zoimel was without a rabbi, and when the Aderet was there, he said, "I suggest to you, you should take my son-in-law, Rav Kook." They said, "He's so young. He wasn't yet, he was only 22 and a half years old." Again, a city that had great rabbis before, you get someone with more experience, more. So he says, you don't know this, again, the Aderet speaking to him, my friend, you don't know who this giant of Torah is. He should come to speak to you, and you'll see what kind of Gaon and what kind of Rav he is. So he said, this Rabbi Matityahu that was searching for the rabbi, the leader there, the community, okay, we'll talk to the people there. The people agreed that Rav Kook should come and give them a test speech, an audition. So he came on Shabbat to speak. I mean, he came before Shabbat, but he came and spoke before them on Shabbat. First, the Aderet went up to the podium to introduce his son-in-law, and then Rav Kook, his time came to speak, and he started he gave a whole lecture. It says here what the lecture was about, a certain verse in Yeshayahu. He gave a drasha, and they were so amazed. In other words, we'll talk about maybe later, the ability to I don't know, to sermons, but not the usual sermons. It would like all of the Torah, he would put different aspects together, like I said, halacha, agada, a gemara, a question here, and put it all together in this beautiful edifice of Torah. We have a few of the drashot that he gave, this book Midbar Shur, that Rav Kook actually wrote down some of his sermons. They're, I think we learned one of them before Rosh Hashanah, I don't remember, about the shofar. It's hard to describe the putting together different things and different ideas and different sources. And for going on and speaking, other occasions, people said I used to talk for hours without any preparation. There was once a siyum in Zimmel, in the city, that he was this young rabbi. They did a siyum, right? When you finish the shas, so you do a siyum, a summary of all the, a celebration of finishing the Gemara. So they had 7 days of this celebration, and Rav Kook gave a special hadran, it's called, the summary speech, so to speak, that everyone opened the Gemara, each one like learned a different Gemara. So each one would open the page, the Gemara, whatever he wanted, and Rav Kook would give us a summary of what all the topics of that page, and all the different Gemarot, and all the, together, put them all together in this, like I said, this, as if they're all connected, showing how it's all one piece and one beautiful puzzle. From all, again, with no preparation, just mentioning the page, what page you're, whatever, and each one, and making it as if they all are connected. It's all one beautiful edifice. It's hard to describe. Also, it's famous for his speeches on the Sudash Lishit and Shabbat Yerushalayim. The great rabbis used to come, the Rav, from all the different walks, not just the Zionists, all the Haredim, and they used to come to hear his. It was just. They all quoted, the people that were there call it the Mayana Mitgaber. It says in Pirkei Avot, like this fountain, this unending fountain, this flow, this total flow of Torah. Just not preparation, no, without just putting all together, all the different sources in a beautiful structure of, with, again, I'm not even good at even describing it. It's so, literally a building of all the ideas and the depth of the ideas, like worlds of philosophy and thought and understanding and midot and halacha, and all of it that fits in this beautiful speech. Again, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the great posek in Yerushalayim that died a few years ago, he used to go and mention when he was young, he used to go every Shabbat. All these great rabbis, it was an unbelievable experience. Just seeing this, they said not only, even if you couldn't understand it all, because like hours, used to speak for hours without any preparation, just to this flowing thought, but it's all connected, it's all coherent. It's not like it's some random idea here, a quote there. Putting it all together, like I did in this hadran of the siyum, each different Gemara, different topics totally, and he put them all together as if they were all connected without any preparation. It was just this totally, again, phenomenal memory we said before. But this Mayana Mitgaber, because Torah was living inside of it. It was like a speed. It was like him speaking. It was like, you don't have to prepare something. It's your natural flow, his neshama, his writings were all firsthand. How do you say, first copy? Never like he didn't write, how do you say, corrections in a first edition and copying and fixing it. We have all, the handwriting. Maybe I'll show you sometime the picture of his notebooks, of just like spiritual diaries. Like his writings, most of his writings were not written as books. they were like, again, diaries. Like he would just write down thoughts that he had, and later his son, Rav Tziyuda, put them together into called it the books of Orot, Orot Torah, Orot Tshuva. Actually, Orot Tshuva, he wrote the first 3 chapters. That he did plan to write a book on Tshuva, and the rest he didn't finish. That Rav Kook, his son, compiled from all the different writings. Again, these notebooks. But he had these giant notebooks. Some of them were small, some of them big. And in Switzerland, maybe we'll talk about it. The writings of Rav Kook. But it was like the first, just this flow, this Mayana Mitgaber, this unending fountain of Torah. It just, and the Shema speaking, literally from above, this Torah from within, just coming out. And it's, again, like I said, it's not just a scholar that puts together a lot of different ideas. He's a great speaker, a great scholar, and knows how to, but it was, like I said, it comes from within. It was in the Shema that was speaking. Literally the word of Hashem that comes in this level that was, again, that's before, this other dimension. So there's more stories, but I see that it's already after 6. And you want to continue a little bit, or you want to next time, or now, or next time, or a few more minutes?
A few more minutes is okay. Yeah, of course.
All right.
A few more minutes is
5 more
okay,
minutes.
of course.
So, of what? The picture of a cook? Show the picture of a cook. Where was I then? I closed the book. The Rabbanut in Zoimel. So then he became, anyway, as you understand, that after hearing that lecture, that audition, he was immediately accepted in Rav Kook to be the rabbi of Zoimel. Zoimel, if I'm saying it right. Maybe you from, I don't know how to say it. There he studied, it says, 16 hours a day. He tried to avoid, again, there weren't that many questions, apparently. It was good for him at this time. He said, especially in the winter time, he sat there learning for 16 hours a day. People didn't bother him so much with questions or... Then the daughter of the Aderet, Rav Kook's wife, in other words, passed away when he was still in Zoimel, in his first rabbinate. And he had one daughter, a 1.5-year-old daughter. The Aderet, again, he's called the Aderet. I showed you the picture before. That's his initials. He's known as the Aderet. Rav Eliyahu David Rabinowitz Tomim. Aderet. Aleph Daled Reish Tav Ha. Rav Eliyahu David Rabinowitz Tomim. He had a twin brother, which Rav Kook writes about. He has a whole book on these twins, these giants of Torah that were unbelievable description. Rav Kook talks about the Aderet and why he writes about them in order to learn from their ways and to try to emulate of dedication to Torah and mitzvot that are unbelievable the way he describes there, which is a lot about himself, but he's not talking about them. He's talking about the greatness of his father-in-law and his brother and his twin. But the Aderet says, look, I have an offer for you. I don't want to lose you as a son-in-law. So I want you to marry my twin brother's daughter. So indeed, so stay in the family, right? To keep it in the family. So Rav Kook married the Aderet's niece, his brother's daughter. And from that were born Rav Tziyuda, Rav Kook, that I had the privilege to learn under for a few years, 6 years. Rav Tziyuda Cohen Kook, and another daughter that married Rav Ranan. Maybe we'll talk about that also. But so nevertheless, Rav Tziyuda is the son of Rav Kook, but from the second wife. Here it also mentioned that this period he used to go visit the city of Shavel, which was there, the home of the Leshem, the Rav Eliashiv. And Rav Aryeh Levin, who was, the Mechutan, their kids, the in-laws of the of the Leshem. Their children got married. That's why Rav Aryeh Levin was it's all connected with the great rabbis and the family there, Rav Aryeh Levin. Nevertheless, Rav Aryeh Levin, you've heard of, right? The book of the Tzaddik in our time was very connected and close to Rav Kook. Rav Aryeh Levin connected to the Bala Leshem, right? The in-laws. So he said, in the name of the Leshem, told me how he used to be spent many, many nights learning together, like to learn the Kabbalah with Rav Kook, with the Leshem, the Rav Eliashiv. again, there's a lot of stories about his activities there in the city of Boysk. That was the next city, right? After Zoma, we said he was the rabbinate of Boysk. There, it was more exciting. There they had a group of, it was more of a modern city with enlightened Jews, what they're called, secular. And Rav Kook stood strongly in a positive way, in a good way, but in a special way of reproaching and, how do you say, rebuking and trying to bring back the Torah. They had different activities there that were not in the law, according to the ways of Torah. This, I remember Rav Tuda used to tell this story, how once they had a charity organization to get money, like they used to, a fundraising organization, dinners, what we call now, for the poor of the city. And once, one of the nights, they organized with these enlightened, the maskilim, these enlightened Jews organized one of these dinner events. Part of it including this dancing, couples dancing, mixed dancing, to have part of the fundraising event. Rav Kook told about, who has heard about this, and sent immediately to cancel this dancing part of the event. They said they can't. It's already, we got the permission, we got from the moshel, from the non-Jew responsible for the city. In other words, already officially, we put out the announcement, it can't be canceled. So Rav Kook said, okay, so I'll be there. I'm coming to this this event. So again, Rav Kook showed up, and you can understand that in his presence, the dancing was canceled. Other things, different stories about his rabbanut, but maybe I'll get to. There's amazing stories. Maybe the story about his rabbinate in Yaffa. How did he get to Eretz Yisrael? So before he was the rabbi in Eretz Yisrael, he was still the rabbi who said in Boyce. He got a lot of different offers. And the Chofetz Chaim said he has to accept. So anyway, so he already accepted in Zaimel and now in Boyce. And now he continued getting more offers from bigger cities in Lithuania, from Salant. You've heard of Salant. I don't know, there's another city I've never heard of. Ihoman near Minsk, and Kovna, after the son of the Yitzchak Elchanan Kovna, that was the rabbi there. So he got all these offers from these big cities to be the rabbi, also to be a lecturer, the speaker, a Magid in Vilna. And also Rabbi Eliezer Gordon, who is the rabbi and the head of the yeshiva in Telz, the famous Telz yeshiva. Now it's in America, but there's also a branch, I think, in Israel, but the big one, I think, in America. But then it was in Telz, the city Telz. They wanted Rav Kook to come to be the mashgiach, to be the spiritual mentor. It was known that in Volozhin, the Netziv used to send the weaker students to Rav Kook to get chizuk, to get strength, to strengthen them spiritually. They saw that he had this talent of explaining Torah and the grandeur and the greatness and the way that wakes you up to want to live it and be it. Just his personality, but also his ability to explain and the emunah side of Torah, the spiritual side of Torah. So in Volozhin, the Netziv used to send the students to him to get strengthened. But in Telz, this Rabbi Eliezer Gordon, there's also a picture of him somewhere, that he sent to Rav Kook. He came to Rav Kook to have him be the mashgiach, the spiritual leader in the Telz yeshiva. I have here a story of that. Hallelujah, cool find it. Where's the other book? Hallelujah. What page? Can't find it. I have a picture here also, if I can see the picture of, I don't know if this is the, oh boy, why is it, I don't know, you can't see it. Oh, closer or farther, why does it disappear? Here, this is Rabbi Eliezer Gordon, the head of the Telz Yeshiva. So he came in Russia, a lot of these new movements were becoming very strong, national movements or secular movements or enlightenment movements that were taking their toll on the yeshiva world also. People were excited. The yeshiva boys that heard about life and wisdom and science, it took its toll on the yeshiva, and there was a danger that some yeshiva boys would be leaving. So the tells yeshiva, he came to Rav Kook because he heard that he has a good spiritual influence and the youth cling to him. So he asked him, to the Rav of Boys, Rav Kook, to come, to leave his community and to be in the Telz Yeshiva. He said how there was the Russian Revolution, I guess 1917. The Russian, 1917? No, this is before 1917. This is like the early 1900s, the beginning of 1900s. But nevertheless, he said the last year of Rav Kook's being in the rabbinate in Boys, the beginning, I don't know, he says the Russian Revolution. This is a rabbi that wrote this story that was taking its toll in the cities of Israel, the Jewish population, and the spirit of the revolution started even entering the Yeshiva and Telz. The Gaon, the great rabbi, Rabbi Ezra Gordon, decided to invite Rav Kook and to put him in the head of the spiritual thing, the head of the spiritual influence there. Rav Kook was interested in this job because that's what he liked, to wake people up, to return them back to their true source, to be their true selves, to wake up the neshama and to live the divine ideal properly, fully. So he went to visit in Telz, and he indeed captured the hearts, I'm just translating literally, in his speeches of Torah and in halakha. They saw he was a giant in halakha, not just a spiritual guy that knows, let's say, Jewish, call it philosophy or whatever, but in giant in halakha. Kids are a giant of Torah in all the aspects, in iyun, in depth, that he was like a good teacher of the perplexed, it says. The daughter of Rav Gordon, excuse me, the daughter of Rav Gordon was married to Sarah Miriam Sorotskin. She said to Rav Tzuda, again, Rav Kook's son, she told him, again, these anecdotes or these testimonies that Rav Tzuda heard these stories from people that knew his father, that I was a young girl then, but I still remember the unbelievable tumult, so to speak, the air around the visit of the rabbi from Boise. When Rav Kook came to Telz to visit, to not audition, but again, like to maybe take the job. And the house was just talking about the Boyska Rav. The Boyska Rav is coming here, he's here. I don't remember what he said, exactly what they said about him, but I remember the impression that everyone was so full of harachan haratzah, of such respect and awe on this young rabbi. They spoke about this unique personality, and they had great hopes for his spiritual influence on the yeshiva. But Hashem had other plans. At the same time that Rav Eliezer Gordon was trying to bring Rav Kook to Telz, Rav Yoel Moshe Solomon in Israel was trying to fill the vacated seat of I mentioned Rav Hertz in Yafo that passed away in 1902. He wanted to bring Rav Kook to Yafo. And ultimately, Eretz Yisrael won. Between Telz or Yafo, Eretz Yisrael, Rav Kook said, I'm going. And it wasn't always easy. First of all, the community of boys didn't want him to leave, refused to let him go, so to speak. Many rabbis, where do I have it here? Tried to convince him not to go. You'll be wasted there. You'll have the conflict there that you don't like, conflicts. There you have the secular and the religious, and the Haredim will be against you, you're a Zionist, like I said, and the secular won't accept you, whatever, the modern nationalists, you won't be able to function there. You'll just stay here in Israel, and stay here in Boysk, in Europe. We have cities that are waiting for you, that you can do so much and give so much. Rav Chaim Ozer Grozynski, one of the giants of the generation in Vilna, he tried to tell him not to go. Ultimately, as Rav Kook decided to go and became the rabbi of Yafo. He arrived in 1904. Rav Tzura used to say in Shnat Tafshin Samach Dalet, Tisader, like in the initials, in the Hebrew date, right? 56, not 56, Taf Reish Samach Dalet. What are we talking about? Taf Reish is 56, 64. Anyway, in the Common Era, 1904. But in Hebrew, the Tisader, like we do Tashap, right? The word, sometimes it forms the word. Tisader, the year of 56, 64, is Tisader. Like Rav Kook came and made order. Like now is the year of the order. Now this Tisader. This order now came to the world. Like the conductor now arrives in Israel. It was called the Rabbinate of Yafo and the settlements, surrounding settlements. The settlements then of those days, like I said, the pioneers, the Zionists, but very idealistic, very this, but not, let's call it religious. And there, Rav Kook wrote a very, entering Eretz Yisrael, he formulated his ideas very strongly on understanding this generation. He wrote what's called the generation, Hamamar Ador, which there I would call it this spiritual diagnosis of the generation, of recognizing, like I said before, the inner dimension, not just judging by what's on the surface, but seeing this idealism, seeing this inner good. We mentioned before from the Tikkun Zohar, this special neshama, this neshama that is pushing these people to grow, to work, they're infused with this giant spirit, this neshama of redemption, that they're not aware of the true source and where it's going, how to fulfill it expressly on the religious aspect. But he recognized, he already identified this diagnosis of this super neshama that is looking for greatness and grandeur. And the problem is that they saw Torah as something, what they thought was beneath them, was something archaic, something dark and anti-life and exile and ghetto, and they were looking for life. So they felt they had the need to revolt against this Torah, which, like the pioneers wrote, see, Torah is the shackles that prevents us from being a full, vital nation, to be what we want to be, this living, healthy nation like all other nations. But he said this revolution against Torah emanated not because it was too hard to keep Torah. It was above them. It's too hard to live these lofty ideas. But it was what they thought was beneath them. They saw it as something so old and dark and anti-life. And we want life. So they opted for life as opposed to Torah. And Rav Kook comes to show that the answer is not to yell at them or scream at them. That doesn't solve the problem. You might feel better that I yelled at them and tell them how lousy they are, how secular they are. You can throw rocks at them. But to solve the problem, if you understand the problem, the root solution is to show them the Torah, to reveal the Torah in its true grandeur, what they're looking for. They're looking for a Torah of life, not Torah that they saw as against life, but to show them that the Torah, what it really is, the neshama of the Zionism, the neshama of this whole process, the goal and the source of life of the resurging nation. That is what Torah really is. And that, if they get that, then they'll thrive for Torah and then search and then continue with Torah. They won't be against it. So you have to know the solution. In other words, first of all, you have to know the diagnosis, and then you can solve the problem. Like I said before, if all you see is judged by the external, you just put a Band-Aid on it, you'll misjudge and misguide and not be able to direct this nation to do tshuva, to bring them what you want them to do. But if you understand what the problem is, and that's this article he wrote upon arriving in Eretz Yisrael, he understood now what is going on. He saw the inner workings of this, the neshama that is pushing and driving these idealistic people that have this, again, the inner good, a very strong inner good. And unfortunately, conscious level is not aware of how to live that, and therefore don't live according to Torah, and even against that. So therefore, the solution, like I said, is to expose them the bigger Torah. But that is when the writings that he wrote then of this book, this article called Mamar Ador, and other books, other writings. I'll just summarize quickly more of the details, and maybe we'll get next time more of the writing and a little bit of the writings of Rav Kook and different to show how this is expressed in his writings. He wrote books on the necessity to use the halachic preference to use the ungrafted etrogim in Eretz Yisrael to support the growing settlement in Eretz Yisrael economically, but he showed the halachic sources how not to get these etrogim from Yavan, from Greece, these other places that people used to get etrogim, but rather to support Eretz Yisrael. He wrote the books about the tefillin, putting the tefillin on there. That was when he was even younger. That was in Chutz La'aretz. He wrote still about these, putting the tefillin in the right place, also the halachic aspect, and also the mystical, spiritual significance of tefillin and what it does and how the nation, how it's connected again to the nation coming alive again, how it's a national goal. In other words, tefillin isn't just some religious obligation. He puts in the perspective, you see how it helps part of the national rebirth and the world perfection, how it connects it all, the ability, again, to put all the different subjects together, the halakha and the agadah, the mystical and the practical. It was his writings and his teachings and his very unique, very special. But in 1914, he accepted an invitation to go to the Agudat Yisrael convention in Berlin. He didn't want to leave Israel, but then he was convinced that maybe he could influence to put Eretz Yisrael on the agenda, on the Orthodox, again, the Agudat Yisrael, the not-so-Zionist movement, but to try to infuse, again, a little bit the Eretz Yisrael spirit. But then World War I broke out shortly after his arrival in Germany, and he, being a citizen or was born in Russia, whatever it was, so he had to seek refuge in neutral Switzerland. So he resided in St. Gallen, and there are a lot of the writings, because he sat there and learning full-time with less disturbances. He was, people used to come, and they heard that he was there. They would come to meet him and be with him. But a lot of the writings, and maybe were written there, of these notebooks that I mentioned, unbelievable thoughts and ideas that he wrote down there. In 1916, they asked him to be a rabbi in London, in the Machzikei Adat Shul, a famous Beit Knesset community in London, Spitalfields, I think. Now I think it's Muslims moved in there, whatever. But then it was this Jewish community, a very important Jewish community there. Famous rabbis were before that or after that. But he told them only under the condition that the minute I can go back to Eretz Yisrael, I'm leaving. I'm not coming to be a rabbi here to stay. The minute the war ends and I can go back to Eretz Yisrael, I'm leaving. So he was there in 1916. He was the rabbi there. Indeed, when the war ended, I think he came back to no, then he was already in 1919 when he came. What was before that? In 1919, it says he came, he left London to serve as a rabbi of Jerusalem. He was asked to be the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. Again, that wasn't so simple. There were different factions in Jerusalem, what's called the Haredi, the Prushi. But ultimately, he was, we'll talk about that, but he became what's called the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. And his two ideas that he had were to try to set up a chief rabbinate, that there should be one central rabbinic authority for all the Jews. Not that everyone decides for himself and different opinions, different things. The idea of unity, we said, oneness, achdut. Also halachically, that there should be one source, one central body that will govern and guide, like this, ultimately in the future, the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, that there's one source, there's one law that everyone abides by and knows. Like I said, we have the Shulchan Aruch that everyone goes by. There's the Mishnah Berurah, the Ashkenazim go, the Sephardim maybe have Kaf Chaim and Ben Ish Chai, but we still have a multitude. But in the future, the Sanhedrin that decided all the conflicts, all the different opinions, the different questions that came up. So to make the chief rabbinate, that to be a central body, a unified body, and also to set up a yeshiva. And then he founded in 1921, 22 maybe, the yeshiva, what's called the yeshiva, Merkaz Rav, the central universal yeshiva in Yerushalayim. While he was, a little anecdote, we'll get back to maybe more anecdotes, I don't know now, tonight, over my 5 minutes, but this last story before I get to the end. When he was in London, in England, then it was in 1917, they were discussing the Balfour Declaration of giving the Jewish people the right to come back to their home in Palestine, which is an amazing thing. Again, we'll talk about that, how Rav Kook foresaw that also. He saw the World War, what was going on there, the Great War then, that this has to do with the return of the Jewish people back to Israel. And then no one thought about the Jewish people. They weren't even accepted as a nation. In other words, that all of a sudden, the outcome of the war was this unexpected, the only thing that came out of the war, the Balfour Declaration, that the Jews have the right to come back and establish their home in Eretz Yisrael. And ultimately ratified later in San Remo, and then in the UN in 1948, whatever, the ratification of the nations accepting the Jews as, again, a nation again. Not just that they're persecuted and suffering. Now they're legitimate. They're a nation. Again, now trying to retract that in our times, again, to try to retract that, the Balfour Declaration, etc., that recognition. But nevertheless, the Rav Kook was there when they were deciding on it, and there were a bunch of you can call them assimilated Jews that were against, that said we're not a nation, we're a religion. We don't need a land. We don't want to come back to the land. Like the reform movement in America, or in Europe and America, that we're no longer a nation anymore. We have no aspirations for a homeland, for a nation. We're just anyway. It's another topic. But there were those that were against, Jews that were against. And Rav Kook made some very strong statements and passed out these flyers to all the Bate Knesset to read on Shabbat. This treachery, how do you say, treason against the Jewish people, that we're praying all the time just to come back to be our full, the normal selves of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. How can you say this? Very strong wording. Ultimately, it got to the House of Commons or Lords. I don't know, Lord Montague, I think. No. One of the lords got up and said, who represents the Jewish people? We want to know what the Jewish people, do they want the land of Israel or not? We want to give them the Balfour Declaration to recognize their rights to return to the land. But the Jews themselves say they don't want it. So this lord, one of the lords got up, I don't have it here. He said, who represents the Jewish people more? We want to know what the Jewish people think. Do they want it or not? Lord Montague, I think he was maybe the assimilated one, or Rabbi Kook, this rabbi that they recognized in England that already had this influence there. So ultimately, again, it was passed and accepted again. So again, God worked out that he should be, how do you say, exiled from Eretz Israel, from Switzerland, gets to England. Then you get the time when now they're discussing this Balfour Declaration to enable the Jews to come back to Israel. Rav Kook is there, very instrumental and central in the decision to grant the right of the Jewish people there, and to be there at the right person at the right time that Hashem put there, to have passing this Balfour Declaration and all that came after that. To quickly, the end, the ultimate end, in 1935, Rav Kook had cancer and died on the 3rd of Elul, like 2 weeks before his 70th birthday, which was exactly 16 years after he came to Yerushalayim as the chief rabbi. In other words, take off 16 years from 1935, he became the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim on the 3rd of Elul, and the 3rd of Elul in 1935, he it was a month or 2 months from now, next month, 2 weeks, Rav Kook's passed away. So that's the little biography. There's a lot more stories about giants of Torah, what they said about Rav Kook. I mean, maybe next time just a few more. I don't want to bother you now, but a few more things that are amazing, that giants, and like not simple people, whatever, but people that were of stature themselves were the giants. The Aderet, his father-in-law, he said that to this rabbi in Chaim Ozer Grozinski in Europe, when he went to a wedding in Europe, in Vilna, he said, we're big, we're scholars, people think, until we get to the doorknob of Rav Kook, my son-in-law. Like, we're midgets compared to him. When we get to his thing, I don't reach his karsulai, I don't reach his ankles. That's the Aderet, the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. Again, he died in 1905, a year after Rav Kook came to Israel. He was in Yafo, and the father-in-law was in Yerushalayim, the chief rabbi. But he says, we're nothing compared to my son Rav Kook, and not his humility. Again, Rav Kook is, so maybe we'll get to that. One last thing of the prayers of Rav Kook. I just like this, I shouldn't start this, but Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer said about people that criticize Rav Kook, and again, the Haredi said he's too Zionist, but he said, Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer, he was like what's called the head of the elder of the rabbis of the yeshivot. He had the yeshiva in Slutsk, in Yerushalayim, and books on the Rambam, a giant, again, learned in Volozhin. He says that this is, I'll just end with this. Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer, that's all. Halavai, it should only be that I should pray Ni'ilah, right? The end, the final prayer of Yom Kippur, when everyone gets all of their energies in their final culmination, right? The height of Yom Kippur, everyone after the fast, and Hashem Hu Elokim, and the ultimate dveikut of the prayer. Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer, this giant, much older than Rav Kook, he says that halavai should only be that I should merit to pray on the Nilan Yom Kippur like the day-to-day mincha of Rav Kook. His dveikut, his cleavage to Hashem. So it was unusual, unique, like I said, a special neshama. We'll continue maybe next time a few more anecdotes, stories, testimony, but maybe also the writings, which will see indicate this, like these ideas of the seeing the one, the totality, the harmony of all, the necessity of all, and the ability to put each thing in its proper place. This vision of oneness, of unity, of holistic perspective. which is that we mentioned the Torah Eretz Yisrael, and the Torah of the Mashiach. And B'ezrat Hashem, we should try to learn that and study that, to cleave to that ourselves, and to be those that can help the nation, lead the nation and the world to its ultimate destiny of towards perfection. B'ezrat Hashem. Any quick questions, or if you want, I mean.